Oh, welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, starting with Part 2, Chapter 35. But first, let's just do it. I'm like excited to see what's going to happen in this story, so let's just do it. Previously on Anna Karenina. I keep wanting to call it Leo Tolstoy. Previously on Anna Karenina, we had some more drama. Okay, so we had we were at the races again, but this time instead of following Vronsky, we were following Anna and her husband Alexei Alexandrovich. And it is very obvious that Anna is very concerned for Vronsky. And Alexei is trying to make it appear in society that everything is fine. So he makes public appearances with Anna at least once a week. He gives her like a spending allowance, like all of these things, even though he knows that their relationship is fraught. And he is going to, or he does, confront Anna one more time. And he has convinced himself in his mind that Anna once more is going to say, everything is okay. Everything is fine. You have nothing to worry about. What people are talking about is just so, so silly. But that's not what she says. She says that she can't concentrate on what he's saying because she is only thinking of Vronsky. And she doesn't want to be with Alexei anymore, and she actually kind of hates him. And so he goes his separate way, drops her off where she's staying for the summer, and leaves. And in her mind, she's like, oh, yes, that's right. Okay, just got word that Vronsky is okay. He survived. He didn't die. He's not severely injured from the race. That means he's going to come over tonight, and I don't have to worry about my husband. Then we go over to Kitty, who we have not seen very much of. A long time ago, she left to go abroad because she had fallen ill because of her like love triangle situation that didn't pan out the way that she wanted to. So they are abroad, her and her mother. Her father doesn't really like being abroad, so he just like leaves and comes back. But she has met somebody, met a friend, befriended I forgot her name. Varenka, that's right, because we thought that it sounded like Veruca. Varenka. And Varenka has also had, love issues, but that is not important. What is more important is to serve a higher power and think beyond yourself and, be helpful and all of these things. So Kitty is interested in doing that. So she starts helping other people and the sick, the children, the old, like all of these, and she does start to feel better. But you also get a little peek into like this older guy. I think he had tuberculosis. I'm not really sure what his, no, consumption. But he starts becoming like infatuated with Kitty, and it's like, oh no, this isn't great. And so we had like a weird moment between him and his wife and Kitty's dad when he came to visit. And they went and talked to Varenka's not mother, not real mother, but the woman who raised her. And like after that conversation, Kitty walks away, no longer thinking of her Madame Stahl being on this pedestal and being, untouchable, but just seeing her as a person, a flawed person, which is how her father sees her. So, I think that's where we ended. I think. Yes, that's right. Varenga was the daughter of the cook, and Madame Stahl's daughter was born on the same day but died. So they took the cook's daughter because that's what happens. That's what happens. Yes, that's where we left off. Great, great, great. Good, good, good. Great. Let's do it. I'm excited to see like so much, so much. Let's do it. Let's do it. Ooh, and we're about to start chat. or part 3 too. I'm looking ahead. I'm too excited. Okay. Part 2, Chapter 35. The prince communicated his good humor to his own family and his friends, and even to the German landlord in whose rooms the Sherbatskoys were staying. On coming back with Kitty from the springs, the prince, who had asked the colonel and Marya Yevgenyevna and Varenka all to come and have coffee with them, gave orders for a table and chairs to be taken into the garden under the chestnut tree, and lunch to be laid there. The landlord and his servants, too, grew brisker under the influence of his good spirits. They knew his open-handedness, and half an hour later the invalid doctor from Hamburg, who lived on the top floor, looked enviously out of the window at the merry party of healthy Russians assembled under the chestnut tree. In the trembling circles of shadow cast by the leaves, at a table covered with a soft cloth and set with coffee pot, bread and butter, cheese, and cold game, sat the princess in a high cap with lilac ribbons, distributing cups and bread and butter. At the other end sat the prince, eating heartily and talking loudly and merrily. The prince had spread out near him his purchases, carved boxes and knickknacks, paper knives of all sorts, of which he bought a heap at every watering place, and bestowed them upon everyone, including Lieschen, the servant girl, and the landlord, with whom he jested in his comically bad German, assuring him that it was not the water that cursed Kitty, but his splendid cookery, especially his plum soup. The princess laughed at her husband for his Russian ways, but she was more lively and good-humored than she had been all the while she had been at the waters. The colonel smiled, as he always did, at the people's jokes, but as far as regards Europe, of which he believed himself to be making a careful study, he took the princess's side. The simple-hearted Marya Yevgenyevna simply roared with laughter at everything absurd the prince said, and his jokes made Varenka helpless with feeble but infectious laughter, which was something Kitty had never seen before. Kitty was glad of all of this, but she could not be light-hearted. She could not solve the problem her father had unconsciously set her by his good-humored view of her friends and of the life that had so attracted her. To this doubt there was joined the change in her relations with the Petrovs, which had been so conspicuously and unpleasantly marked that morning. Everyone was good-humored, but Kitty could not feel good-humored, and this increased her distress. She felt a feeling such as she had known in childhood, when she had been shut in her room as a punishment, and had heard her sister's merry laughter outside. "Well, what did you buy this mass of things for?" said the princess, smiling, and handing her husband a cup of coffee. "One goes for a walk, one looks in the shop, and they ask you to buy. Directly they say, 'Der Schlag.' I can't hold out. I lose 10 thalers." "It's simply from boredom," said the princess. "Well, of course it is. Such boredom, my dear, that one doesn't know what to do with oneself." "How can you be bored, Prince? There's so much that's interesting now in Germany," said Marya Yevgenyevna. "But I know everything that's interesting. The plum soup, I know. And the pea sausage, I know. I know everything." "No, you may say what you like, Prince. There's the interest of their institutions," said the colonel. "But what is there interesting about it? They're all as pleased as brass halfpence. They've conquered everybody. And why am I pleased at that? And I haven't conquered anyone. And I'm obliged to take off my own boots, yes, and put them away, too, in the morning, get up and dress once more, and go to the dining-room to drink bad tea. How different it is at home. You get up in no haste, you get cross, grumble a little, and come round again. You've time to think things over, and no hurry." "But time's money, you forget that," said the colonel. "Time, indeed, that depends. Why, there's time one would give a month of for 6 pence, and time you wouldn't give half an hour of for any money. Isn't that so, Katinka? What is it? Why are you so depressed?" "I'm not depressed." "Where are you off to? Stay a little longer," he said to Varenka. "I must be going home," said Varenka, getting up, and again she went off into the giggle. When she had recovered, she said good-bye and went into the house to get her hat. Kitty followed her. Even Varenka struck her as different. She was not worse, but different from what she had fancied her before. "Oh, dear, it's a long while since I've laughed so much," said Varenka, gathering up her parasol and her bag. "How nice he is, your father." Kitty did not speak. When shall I see you again?" asked Varenka. "Mamma meant to go and see the Petrovs. Won't you be there?" said Kitty, to try Varenka. "Yes," answered Varenka. "They're getting ready to go away, so I promised to help them pack." "Well, I'll come too, then." "No, why should you?" "Why not? Why not? Why not?" said Kitty, opening her eyes wide and clutching at Varenka's parasol so as not to let her go. "No, wait a minute. Why not?" "Ah, nothing. Your father has come, and besides, they will feel awkward at your helping." "No, tell me why you don't want me to be often at the Petrovs'. You don't want me to. Why not?" "I didn't say that," said Varenka quietly. "No, please tell me." "Tell you everything?" asked Varenka. "Everything! Everything!" Kitty absented. "Well, it's really nothing of any consequence, only that Mihail Alexeyevich, that was the artist's name, had meant to leave earlier, and now he doesn't want to go away," said Varenka, smiling. "Well, well?" Kitty urged impatiently, looking darkly at Varenka. "Well, and for some reason Anna Pavlovna told him that he didn't want to go because you are here. Of course, that was nonsense, but there was a dispute over it. Over you. You know how irritable these sick people are." Kitty, scowling more than ever, kept silent, and Varenka went on speaking alone, trying to soften or soothe her, and seeing a storm coming, she did not know whether of tears or of words. "So, you'd better not go. You understand. You won't be offended? And it serves me right. And it serves me right," Kitty cried quickly, snatching the parasol out of Varenka's hand and looking past her friend's face. Varenka felt inclined to smile, looking at her childish fury, but she was afraid of wounding her. "How does it serve you right? I don't understand." "It serves me right because it was all sham, because it was all done on purpose and not from the heart. What business had I to interfere with outsiders? And so it's come about that I'm a cause of quarrel, and I've done what nobody asked me to do because it was all a sham, a sham, a sham." "A sham? With what object?" asked Varenka, gently. "Oh, it's so idiotic, so hateful. There was no need whatever for me, nothing but sham," she said, opening and shutting the parasol. "But with what object?" "To seem better to people, to myself, to God, to deceive everyone. No, now I won't descend to that. I'll be bad, but anyway not a liar, a cheat." "But who is a cheat?" said Varenka reproachfully. "You speak as if—" But Kitty was not in one of her gusts of fury, and she would not let her finish. "I don't talk about you. Not about you at all. Your perfectionism. Your perfection. Yes, yes, I know you're all perfection, but what am I to do if I'm bad? This would never have been if I weren't bad. So let me be what I am. I won't be a sham. What will I have to do with Anna Pavlovna? Let them go their way, and me go mine. I can't be different, and yet it's not that. It's not that." "What is not that?" asked Varenka in bewilderness. "Everything. I can't act except from the heart, and you act from principle. I liked you simply, but you must You most likely only wanted to save me, to improve me." "You are unjust," said Varenka. "But I'm not speaking of other people. I'm speaking of myself. Kitty." They heard her mother's voice. "Come here. Show Papa your necklace." Kitty, with a haughty air, without making peace with her friend, took the necklace in a little box from the table and went to her mother. "What's the matter? Why are you so red?" her mother and father said to her with one voice. "Nothing," she answered. "I'll be back directly." And she ran back. "She's still here," she thought. "What am I to say to her? Oh dear, what have I done? What have I done? Why was I rude to her? What am I to do? What am I to say to her?" thought Kitty, and she stopped in the doorway. Varenka, in her hat and with a parasol in her hands, was sitting at the table examining the spring which Kitty had broken. She lifted her head. "Varenka, forgive me. Do forgive me," whispered Kitty, going up to her. "I don't remember what I said. I really didn't mean to hurt you," said Varenka, smiling. Peace was made. But with her father's coming, all the world in which she had been living was transformed for Kitty. She did not give up everything she had learned, but she became aware that she had deceived herself in supposing she could be what she wanted to be. Her eyes were, it seemed, opened. She felt all the difficulty of maintaining herself without hypocrisy and self-conceit on the pinnacle to which she had wished to mount. Moreover, she became aware of all the dreariness of the world of sorrow, of sick and dying people, in which she had been living. The efforts she had made to like it seemed to her intolerable, and she felt a longing to get back quickly into the fresh air, to Russia, to Ergashova, where, as she knew from letters, her sister Dolly had already gone with her children. But her affection for Varenka did not wane. As she said goodbye, Kitty begged her to come to them in Russia. "I'll come when you get married," said Varenka. "I shall never marry." "Well then, I shall never come." "Well then, I shall be married simply for that. Mind now, remember your promise," said Kitty. The doctor's prediction was fulfilled. Kitty returned home to Russia, cured. She was not so happy and thoughtless as before, but she was serene. Her Moscow troubles had become a memory to her. End of the chapter. End of the part. We're now going to be entering part 3. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay. Last chapter, we were with Kitty again, and she has just come to the realization that she cannot be as pious and selfless and all of these things as Varenka. And it kind of makes her a little upset about it, and a little upset at Varenka because she's like, oh, Varenka is just a person. What? So, but previously she saw Varenka and Madame Stahl as these untouchable people, and then having the outside perspective of her father drilled and just like wedged in between her and like her imaginings. She now sees them as regular people and sees them as not better, but just different than she is and different than she can be, and is also realizing that she just can't change who she is, and even as she was changing, she was doing it for the wrong reasons, and whatever those reasons were, and she feels content with that. So now she's going back to Russia and feeling serene, just like the doctor said would happen. So, are we ready for part 3? There are 8 parts in this book. Moving right along. Part 3, Chapter 1. Sergei Ivanovich Koznishev wanted a rest from mental work, and instead of going abroad as he usually did, he came towards the end of May to stay in the country with his brother. In his judgment, the best sort of life was a country life. He had come now to enjoy such a life at his brother's. Konstantin Levin was very glad to have him, especially as he did not expect his brother Nikolay that summer. But in spite of his affection and respect for Sergei Ivanovich, Konstantin Levin was uncomfortable with his brother in the country. It made him uncomfortable, and it positively annoyed him to see his brother's attitude to the country. To Konstantin Levin, the country was the background of life, that is, of pleasures, endeavors, labor. To Sergei Ivanovich, the country meant, on one hand, rest from work, on the other, a valuable antidote to the corrupt influences of town, which he took with satisfaction and a sense of its utility. To Konstantin Levin, the country was good first because it afforded a field of labor, of the usefulness of which there could be no doubt. To Sergei Ivanovich, the country was particularly good because there it was possible and fitting to do nothing. Moreover, Sergei Ivanovich's attitude to the peasants rather piqued Konstantin. Sergei Ivanovich used to say that he knew and liked the peasantry, and he often talked to the peasants, which he knew how to do without affectation or condescension, and from every such conversation he would deduce general conclusions in favor of the peasantry and in confirmation of his knowing them. Konstantin Levin did not like such an attitude to the peasants. To Konstantin, the peasant was simply the chief partner in their common labor, and in spite of all the respect and the love, almost like that of kinship, he had for the peasant, sucked in probably, as he had himself with the milk of his peasant nurse, still as a fellow worker with him, while sometimes enthusiastic over the vigor, gentleness, and justice of these men, he was very often, when their common labors called for other qualities, exasperated with the peasant for his carelessness, lack of method, drunkenness, and lying. If he had been asked whether he liked or didn't like the peasants, Konstantin Levin would have been absolutely at a loss what to reply. He liked and did not like the peasants, just as he liked and did not like men in general. Of course, being a good-hearted man, he liked man rather than he disliked them, and so too with the peasants. But like or dislike the people as something apart he could not only because he lived with the people, and all his interests were bound up with theirs, but also because he regarded himself as part of the people, did not see any special qualities or failings distinguishing himself and the people, and could not contrast himself with them. Moreover, although he had lived so long in the closet relations with the peasants, as farmer and arbitrator, and what was more, as adviser, the peasants trusted him, and for 30 miles round they would come to ask his advice. He had no definite views of the people, and would have been as much at a loss to answer the question whether he knew the people as the question whether he liked them. For him to say he knew the peasantry would have been the same as to say he knew men. He was continually watching and getting to know people of all sorts, and among them peasants, whom he regarded as good and interesting people, and he was continually observing new points in them, altering his former views of them and forming new ones. With Sergei Ivanovich it was quite the contrary. Just as he liked and praised a country life in comparison with the life he did not like, so too he liked the peasantry in contradistinction to the class of men he did not like. and so too he knew the peasantry as something distinct from and opposed to men generally. In his methodical brain there were distinctly formulated certain aspects of peasant life, deduced partly from that life itself, but chiefly from contrast with other modes of life. He never changed his opinion of the peasantry and his sympathetic attitude towards them. In the discussions that arose between the brothers on their views of the peasantry, Sergei Ivanovitch always got the better of his brother, precisely because Sergei Ivanovitch had definite ideas about the peasant, his character, his qualities, and his tastes. Konstantin Levin had no definite and unalterable idea on the subject, and so in their arguments Konstantin was readily convinced, readily convicted of contradicting himself. In Sergei Ivanovitch's eyes, his younger brother was a capital fellow, with his heart in the right place, as he expressed it in French, but with a mind which, though fairly quick, was too much influenced by the impressions of the moment, and consequently filled with contradictions. With all the condescension of an elder brother, he sometimes explained to him the true import of things, but he derived little satisfaction from arguing with him because he got the better of him too easily. Konstantin Levy regarded his brother as a man of immense intellect and culture, as generous in the highest sense of the word, and possessed of a special faculty for working for the public good. But in the depths of his heart, the older he became and the more intimately he knew his brother, the more and more frequently the thought struck him that this faculty of working for the public good, of which he felt himself utterly devoid, was possibly not so much a quality as a lack of something, not a lack of good, honest, noble desires and tastes, but a lack of vital force, of what is called heart, of that impulse which drives a man to choose someone out of the innumerable paths of life, and to care only for that one. The better he knew his brother, the more he noticed that Sergei Ivanovitch, and many other people who worked for the public welfare, were not led by an impulse of the heart to care for the public good, but reasoned from intellectual considerations that it was a right thing to take interest in public affairs, and consequently took interest in them. Levin was confirmed in this generalization by observing that his brother did not take questions affecting the public welfare or the question of the immortality of the soul a bit more to heart than he did chess problems, or the ingenious construction of a new machine. Besides this, Konstantin Levin was not at his ease with his brother, because in summer in the country Levin was continually busy with work on the land, and the long summer day was not long enough for him to get through all he had to do, while Sergei Ivanovitch was taking a holiday. But though he was taking a holiday now, that is to say, he was doing no writing. He was so used to intellectual activity that he liked to put into concise and eloquent shape the ideas that occurred to him, and liked to have someone to listen to him. His most usual and natural listener was his brother, and so in spite of the friendliness and directness of his relations, Konstantin Levin felt an awkwardness in leaving him alone. Sergei Ivanovitch liked to stretch himself on the grass in the sun, and to lie so, basking and chatting lazily. "You wouldn't believe it," he would say to his brother, "what a pleasure this rural laziness is to me. Not an idea in one's brain, as empty as a drum." But Konstantin Levin found it dull sitting and listening to him, especially when he knew that while he was away they would be carting dung onto the fields not plowed ready for it, and heaping it all up anyhow, and would not screw the shares in the plows, but would let them come off and then say that the new plows were a silly invention, and there was nothing like the old Andreevna plow, and so on. You've done enough trudging about in the heat, Sergei Ivanovitch would say to him. No, I must just run round to the counting house for a minute, Levin would answer, and he would run off to the fields. End of part 3, chapter 1. I didn't know if we were going to have any dialogue in that, or if we were just going to be talking about what they're talking about. So we have Levin, who we know has been living in the country and has land and works the land and has a bunch of people who work for him. And his brother Sergei Ivanovich is taking a holiday and has decided to go out to the country and stay with Levin. Well, different ideologies here, both in the people who are working as well as what it means to be in the country. For Levin, peasants and any person is judged individually. Some people he likes, some people he doesn't. Doesn't matter what class they're in. For being in the country, it means hard work, especially in the summer. There's a lot of things to do to get ready for the harvest and like making sure that the crops and the land and all of those things and the animals are all taken care of. And he has so much to do that it is hard to fit it into one day's time. And then on the other side, his brother, Sergei, is like, ah, yes, the countryside, being lazy and doing nothing. And his views of people are peasants are amazing. They're the best people. And regardless of knowing individual people, they should just be lifted up because they're all amazing, they're all wonderful, everything like that. He's basing it on class rather than on an individual type of a level. And so I feel like they're going to butt heads with this. And also, Levin said that he didn't mind because his other brother was not going to be coming to visit, so there won't be any, arguments between them. Which makes me feel like it means that he's going to be coming and there's going to be an argument. Rural laziness is a phrase that could only be coined by the ruling class. You don't know a single rural person you would classify as lazy. Exactly. There is so much to do. So much to do. It's wild. I do not want to be on a farm for many reasons, but also because it is a lot of work that I just don't want to do. That is one of the many reasons why I don't want to live in like rural area. But yeah, I don't know one person who either lives on a farm or just lives in a rural area that I would classify as being lazy. Because they're not. They're not. Their work is just different than people who live in the city. Chapter 2. Early in June, it happened that Agafea Mikhailovna, the old nurse and housekeeper, in carrying to the cellar a jar of mushrooms she had just pickled, slipped, fell, and sprained her wrist. The district doctor, a talkative young medical student who had just finished his studies, came to see her. He examined the wrist, said it was not broken, was delighted at a chance of talking to the celebrated Sergei Ivanovich Koznishev, and to show his advanced views of things told him all the scandal of the district, complaining of the poor state into which the district council had fallen. Sergei Ivanovich listened attentively, asked him questions, and, roused by a new listener, he talked fluently, uttered a few keen and weighty observations, respectfully appreciated by the young doctor, and was soon in that eager frame of mind his brother knew so well, which always, with him, followed a brilliant and eager conversation. After the departure of the doctor, he wanted to go with a fishing rod to the river. Sergei Ivanovich was fond of angling, and was, it seemed, proud of being able to care for such a stupid occupation. Konstantin Levin, whose presence was needed in the ploughland and meadows, had come to take his brother in the trap. It was that time of the year, the turning point of summer, when the crops of the present year are a certainty, when one begins to think of the sowing for next year, and the mowing is at hand, when the rye is all in ear, though its ears are still light, not yet full, and it waves in gray-green billows in the wind, when the green oats with tufts of yellow grass scattered here and there among it droop irregularly over the late-sown fields, when the early buckwheat is already out and hiding the ground, when the fallow lands, trodden hard as stone by the cattle, are half-ploughed over, with paths left untouched by the plough, when from the dry dung-heaps carted onto the fields there comes at sunset a smell of manure mixed with meadow-sweet, and on the low-lying lands the riverside meadows are a thick sea of grass, waiting for the mowing, with blackened heaps of the stalks of sorrel among it. It was the time when there comes a brief pause in the toil of the fields before the beginning of the labors of harvest, every year recurring, every year straining every nerve of the peasants. The crop was a splendid one, and bright, hot summer days had set in with short, dewy nights. The brothers had to drive through the woods to reach the meadows. Sergei Ivanovitch was all the while admiring the beauty of the woods, which were a tangled mass of leaves, pointing out to his brother now an old lime tree on the point of flowering, dark on the shady side, and brightly spotted with yellow stipules, now the young shoots of this year's saplings, bright with emerald. Konstantin Levin did not like talking and hearing about the beauty of nature. Words for him took away the beauty of what he saw. He assented to what his brother said, but he could not help beginning to think of other things. When he came out of the woods, all his attention was engrossed by the view of the fallow land on the upland, in parts yellow with grass, in parts trampled and checkered with furrows, in parts dotted with ridges of dung, and in parts even ploughed. A string of carts was moving across it. Levin counted the carts, and was pleased that all that were wanted had been brought, and at the sight of the meadows, his thoughts passed to the mowing. He always felt something something special moving him to the quick at the haymaking. On reaching the meadow, Levin stopped the horse. The morning dew was still lying on the thick undergrowth of the grass, and that he might not get his feet wet, Sergei Ivanovitch asked his brother to drive him in the trap up to the willow tree from which the carp was caught. Sorry as Konstantin Levin was to crush down his mowing grass, he drove him into the meadow. The high grass softly turned about the wheels and the horse's legs, leaving its seeds clinging to the wet axles and spokes of the wheels. His brother seated himself under a bush, arranging his tackle, while Levin led the horse away, fastened him up, and walked into the vast gray-green sea of grass, unstirred by the wind. The silky grass with its ripe seeds came almost to his waist in the dampest spots. Across the meadow, Konstantin Levin came out onto the road, and met an old man with a swollen eye, carrying a skep on his shoulder. "What, taken a stray swarm, Fomitch?" he asked. "No, indeed, Konstantin Dmitrievich." Yep, that's what it says. Okay. "All we can do to keep our own. This is the second swarm that has flown away. Luckily, the lads caught him. They were plowing your field. They unyoked the horses and galloped after him. Well, what do you say, Fomitch? Start mowing or wait a bit?" Well, our way's to wait till St. Peter's Day, but you always mow sooner. Well, to be sure, please God, the hay's good. Will be plenty for the beasts." What do you think about the weather? That's in God's hands. Maybe it will be fine. Levin went up to his brother. Sergei Ivanovitch had caught nothing, but he was not bored, and seemed in the most cheerful frame of mind. Levin saw that, stimulated by his conversation with the doctor, he wanted to talk. Levin, on the other hand, would have liked to get home as soon as possible to give orders about getting together the mowers for the next day, and to set at rest his doubts about the mowing, which greatly absorbed him. Well, let's get going, he said. Why be such in a hurry? Let's stay a little. But how wet you are, even though one catches nothing, it's nice. That's the best thing about every part of sport, that one has to do with nature. How exquisite this steely water is, said Sergei Ivanovitch. These riverbeds, these riverside banks always remind me of the riddle. Do you know it? The grass says to the water, we quiver, and we quiver. I don't know the riddle, answered Levin wearily. End of chapter 2. Yes, what a great follow-up chapter to our introduction of Sergei Ivanovich staying. So at the beginning of the chapter, um, the house manager, the housekeeper, has fallen, took a tumble, really hurt her wrist. They had to call in the doctor. The doctor has heard of Sergei and was very excited to talk to him. The housemaker is fine. It's not broken. It's just, sprained. She'll be okay. And so Sergei is like, I want to fish today. I imagine myself an angler. And Levin is like, all right, okay, fine. And so they go out on their adventure so that Sergei can fish. And on the adventure, Sergei keeps commenting on how beautiful the land is. And Levin knows that the land is beautiful. And he actually really doesn't like when people talk about how beautiful nature is because it ruins it, it besmirches it. There's no words good enough for Levin to experience the same joy and beauty and splendor as just looking at it, which is great, which is actually hilarious because we get this huge, beautiful description of this land by Tolstoy. And it's like, well, Levin would obviously hate this paragraph. And I just thought that was so funny after like seeing this like huge description of the grasses and the seeds and the plowed land and the trampled land, and I think it's just so funny. And Levin is only thinking about mowing the next day. And he even talks to one of the workers and is like, what do you think about mowing? He's like, well, we usually wait till St. Peter's Day, but we know that you always mow earlier than usual. It's like, well, okay, cool. And Levin is like, all right, that's enough. And so he goes to get Sergei. Sergei has caught nothing, but he's just having a time. He's so joyful on his rest holiday. And then they go back home. It's like Tolstoy is commenting on his own writing. It's brilliant. It's brilliant and cheeky and wonderful. Again, it's almost like Tolstoy can write. It's almost like he's a good writer. Almost. And fun. Chapter 3. Do you know, I've been thinking about you, said Sergei Ivanovitch. It's beyond everything that's being done in the district, according to what this doctor tells me. He's a very intelligent fellow. And as I've told you before, I tell you again, it's not right for you not to go to the meetings and altogether to keep out of the district business. If decent people won't go into it, of course it's bound to go all wrong. We pay the money, and it all goes in salaries, and there are no schools, nor district nurses, nor midwives, nor drugstores. Nothing. Well, did try, said Levin, slowly and unwillingly. I can't, and so there's no help for it. But why can't you? I must own I can't make it out. Indifference, incapacity, I won't admit. Surely it's not simply laziness. None of those things. I've tried, and I see I can do nothing, said Levin. He had hardly grasped what his brother was saying. Looking towards the ploughlands across the river, he made out something black, but he could not distinguish whether it was a horse or the bailiff on horseback. Why is it you can do nothing? You made an attempt and didn't succeed, as you think, and you give in? How can you have so little self-respect? Self-respect, said Levin, stung to the quick by his brother's words. I don't understand. If they told me at college that other people understood the integral calculus and I didn't, then pride would have come in. But in this case, one wants first to be convinced that one has certain qualifications for this sort of business, and especially that all this business is of great importance. What? Do you mean to say if it's not of importance? Said Sergei Ivanovitch, stung to the quick, too, at his brother's considering anything of no importance that interested him, and still more at his obviously paying little attention to what he was saying. I don't think it important. It does not take hold of me. I can't help it, answered Levin, making out that what he saw was the bailiff, and that the bailiff seemed to be letting the peasants go off the ploughed land. They were turning the plough over. Can they have finished ploughing? He wondered. Come, really, though, said the elder brother, with a frown on his handsome, clever face. There's a limit to everything. It's very well to be original and genuine, and to dislike everything conventional. I know all about that. But really, what you are saying either has no meaning, or it has a very wrong meaning. How can you think it a matter of no importance whether the peasant whom you love, as you assert— I never did assert it, thought Levin— dies without help? The ignorant peasant women starve the children, and the people stagnate in darkness, and are helpless in the hands of every village clerk, while you have at your disposal a means of helping them, and don't help them because, to your mind, it's of no importance. And Sergei Ivanovitch put before him the alternative. Either you are so undeveloped that you can't see all that you can do, or you won't sacrifice your ease, your vanity, or whatever it is, to do it. Konstantin Levin felt that there was no course open to him but to submit, or to confess to a lack of zeal for the public good, and this mortified him and hurt his feelings. It's both, he said resolutely. I don't see that it is possible. What? Was it possible, if the money were properly laid out, to provide medical aid? Impossible, as it seems to me, for the 3,000 square miles of our district. What with our thaws and the storms and the work in the fields, I don't see how it is possible to provide medical aid all over. And besides, I don't believe in medicine. Oh, well, that's unfair. I can quote to you thousands of instances, but the schools, anyway. Why have schools? What do you mean? Can there be two opinions of the advantage of education? If it's a good thing for you, it's a good thing for everyone. Konstantin Levin felt himself morally pinned against a wall, and so he got hot, and unconsciously blurted out the chief cause of his indifference to public business. Perhaps it may all be very good, but why should I worry myself about establishing dispensaries which I shall never make use of, and schools to which I shall never send my children, to which even the peasants don't want to send their children, and to which I've no very firm faith that they ought to send them, said he. Sergei Ivanovitch was for a minute surprised at this unexpected view of the subject, but he promptly made a new plan of attack. He was silent for a little, drew out a hook, threw it in again, and turned to his brother, smiling. Come now. In the first place, the dispensary is needed. We ourselves sent for the district doctor for Agafea Mikhailovna. Oh, well, but I fancy her wrist will never be straight again. That remains to be proved. Next, the peasant who can read and write is as a workman of more use and value to you. No, You can ask anyone you like, Konstantin Levin answered with decision. The man that can read and write is much inferior as a workman, and mending the high roads is an impossibility, and as soon as they put up the bridges, they're stolen. Still, that's not the point, said Sergei Ivanovitch, frowning. He disliked contradiction, and still more arguments that were continually skipping from one thing to another, introducing new and disconnected points so that there was no knowing to which to reply. Do you admit that education is a benefit for the people? Yes, I admit it, said Levin without thinking, and he was conscious immediately that he had said what he did not think. He felt that if he admitted that, it would be proved that he had been talking meaningless rubbish. How it would be proved he could not tell, but he knew that this would inevitably be logically proved to him, and he awaited the proofs. The argument turned out to be far simpler than he had expected. If you admit that it is a benefit, said Sergei Ivanovitch, then, as an honest man, you cannot help caring about it and sympathizing with the movement and so wishing to work for it. But I still do not admit this movement to be just, said Konstantin Levin, reddening a little. What? But you said just now, that's to say, I don't admit its being either good or possible. That you can't tell without making the trial. Well, supposing that's so, said Levin, though he did not suppose so at all. Supposing that is so, still I don't see, all the same, what I'm to worry myself about it for. How so? No, since we are talking, explain it to me from the philosophical point of view, said Levin. I can't see where philosophy comes in, said Sergei Ivanovitch in a tone Levin fancied, as though he did not admit his brother's right to talk about philosophy. And that irritated Levin. I'll tell you then, he said with heat. I imagine the mainspring of all our actions is, after all, self-interest. Now, in the local institutions, I, as a nobleman, see nothing that could conduce to my prosperity, and the roads are not better and could not be better. My horses carry me well enough over bad ones. Doctors and dispensaries are no use to me. An arbitrator of disputes is of no use to me. I never appealed to him, and never shall appeal to him. The schools are no good to me, but positively harmful, as I told you. For me, the district institutions simply mean the liability to pay 4 pence halfpenny for every 3 acres, to drive into the town, sleep with bugs, and listen to all sorts of idiocy and loathsomeness and self-interest offers me no inducement. Excuse me, said Sergei Ivanovitch, interposed with a smile. Self-interest did not induce us to work for the emancipation of the serfs, but we did work for it. No, Konstantin Levin broke in with still greater heat. The emancipation of the serfs was a different matter. There no self-interest did come in. One longed to throw off that yoke that crushed us, all decent people among us. But to be a town councillor and discuss how many dustmen are needed and how chimneys shall be constructed in the town in which I don't live, to serve on a jury and try a peasant who's stolen a flitch of bacon, and listen for 6 hours at a stretch of all sorts of jabber from the council for the defense and the prosecution, and the president cross-examining my old half-witted Aloshika. Do you admit, prisoner, to the dock the fact of the removal of the bacon, eh? Konstantin Levin had warmed to his subject, and began mimicking the president and the half-witted Alioshka, and it seemed to him that it was all to the point. But Sergei Ivanovitch shrugged his shoulders. Well, what do you mean to say, then? I simply mean to say that those rights that touch me, my interest, I shall always defend to the best of my ability. That when they made raids on us students and the police read our letters, I was ready to defend those rights to the utmost, to defend my rights to education and freedom. I can understand compulsory military service, which affects my children, my brothers, and myself. I am ready to deliberate on what concerns me, but deliberating on how to spend 40,000 rubles of district council money, or judging the half-witted Alyoshka, I don't understand, and I can't do it. Konstantin Levin spoke as though the floodgates of his speech had burst open. Sergei Ivanovitch smiled. But tomorrow it'll be your turn to be tried. Would it have suited your tastes better to be tried in the old criminal tribunal? I'm not going to be tried. I shan't murder anybody, and I've no need of it. Well, I'll tell you what, he went on, flying off again to a subject quite beside the point. Our district self-government, and all the rest of it, it's just like the birch branches we stick in the ground on Trinity Day, for instance, to look like a copse which has grown up of itself in Europe, and I can't gush over those birch branches and believe in them. Sergei Ivanovitch merely shrugged his shoulders, as though to express his wonder how the birch branches had come into their argument at that point, though he did really understand at once what his brother meant. Excuse me, but you know one really can't argue in that way, he observed. But Konstantin Levin wanted to justify himself for the failing of which he was conscious, of lack of zeal for the public welfare, and he went on. I imagine, he said, that no sort of activity is likely to be lasting if it is not founded on self-interest. That's a universal principle, a philosophical principle, he said, repeating the word philosophical with determination, as though wishing to show that he had as much right as anyone else to talk of philosophy. Sergei Ivanovitch smiled. He too has a philosophy of his own at the service of his natural tendencies, he thought. Come, you'd better let philosophy alone, he said. The chief problem of the philosophy of all ages consists just in finding the indispensable connection which exists between individual and social interests. I lost my spot, sorry. But that's not to the point. What is to the point is the correction I must make in your comparison. The birches are not simply stuck in, but some are sown and some are planted, and one must deal carefully with them. It's only these people that have an intuitive sense of what's of importance and significance in their institutions and know how to value them that have a future before them. It's only those peoples that one can truly call historical. And Sergei carried the subject into the regions of philosophical history, where Konstantin Levin could not follow him, and showed him all the incorrectness of his views. As for your dislike of it, excuse my saying so, that's simply our Russian sloth and old serf owner's way, and I'm convinced that in you it's a temporary error, and will pass. Konstantin was silent. He felt himself vanquished on all sides, but he felt at the same time that what he wanted to say was unintelligible to his brother. Only he could not make up his mind whether it was unintelligible because he was not capable of expressing his meaning clearly, or because his brother would not or could not understand him. But he did not pursue the speculation, and without replying, he fell to musing on a quite different and personal matter. Sergei Ivanovitch wound up the last line, untied the horse, and they drove off. End of chapter 3. What a doozy. Okay, we knew an argument was going to ensue. We knew it. We've talked about their differences pretty much as soon as Sergei came to stay with Levin. And here it is. Here it is. So, Levin is getting extremely heated. And it all starts because Sergei is saying, like, why don't you go to council? Like, these are things that impact you. These are things that impact your area. Like, they make decisions, they're talking about like having medical aid and schools and making the roads better and all of these things for public spaces. And Levin just is getting really riled up, and he's bringing in a lot of things that don't necessarily have to do with the argument and with the current conversation, but he's saying, like, what does he care about having public schools? Why should he want his workers to know how to read and write when in reality, like, people who know how to read and write aren't more valuable than just a workman? And why should he be excited for schools? He's never going to have kids to send to there. Why should he be excited for new roads? His horses do just fine in being able to pull him and his like load across. Why should he care about medicine? He doesn't believe in it anyway. Like, all of these things. And then he brings in other points that Sergei hasn't even brought in. And Sergei is just sort of like sitting back and realizing that this isn't really about the conversation that they're currently having, that something else is going on. And so he's not really instigating. He has a couple of times pointed out, like, oh, okay, but you would benefit from this, or oh, okay, but like that's a little bit wrong what you said. And Levin is just like being so aggressive in this. And Sergei is not really taking the bait. He's not building on Levin's excitement and Levin's like energy. He's staying calm and collected, and it is wild to see this. Also, how can you just not believe in medicine? That's wild to me. Wild to me. And yeah, like Sergey even said, like, the doctor was just here and fixed Agafea's wrist. And Lemon's like, well, it might not even be straight ever again. It's like, well, we could wait and find out. So interesting, interesting. And like very telling in both who they are individually, but also the relationship that they have as brothers. Why should I care about anyone who's not living my life? Signed, Levin. Chapter 4. The personal matter that absorbed Levin during his conversation with his brother was this. Once, in a previous year, he had gone to look at the mowing, and being made very angry by the bailiff, he had recourse to his favorite means for regaining his temper. He took a scythe from a peasant and began mowing. He liked the work so much that he had several times tried his hand at mowing since. He had cut the whole of the meadow in front of his house, and this year, ever since the early spring, he had cherished a plan for mowing the whole days together with the peasants. Ever since his brother's arrival, he had been in doubt whether to mow or not. He was loath to leave his brother alone all day long, and he was afraid his brother would laugh at him about it. But as he drove into the meadow and recalled the sensations of mowing, he came near deciding that he would go mowing. After the irritating discussion with his brother, he pondered over his intention again. I must have physical exercise, or my temper'll certainly be ruined, he thought, and he determined he would go mowing, however awkward he might feel about it with his brother or with the peasants. Toward evening, Constantine Levin went to his counting-house, gave directions as to the work to be done, and sent about the village to summon the mowers for the morrow, to cut the hay in Kalinov meadow, the largest and best of his grasslands. And send my scythe, please, to Tit, for him to set it, and bring it round tomorrow. I shall, maybe, do some mowing myself, too, he said, trying not to be embarrassed. The bailiff smiled and said, yes, sir. At tea the same evening, Levin said to his brother, I fancy the fine weather will last. Tomorrow I shall go mowing. I'm so fond of that form of field labor, said Sergei Ivanovitch. I'm awfully fond of it. I sometimes mow myself with the peasants, and tomorrow I want to try mowing the whole day." Sergei Ivanovich lifted his head and looked with interest at his brother. "How do you mean? Just like one of the peasants? All day long?" "Yes, it's very pleasant," said Levin. "It's splendid as exercise, only you'll hardly be able to stand it," said Sergei Ivanovich without a shade of irony. "I've tried it. It's hard work at first, but you get into it. I dare say I shall manage to keep it up." "Really? What an idea! But tell me, how do the peasants look at it? I suppose they laugh in their sleeves at their masters being such an odd fish." "No, I don't think so. But it's so delightful, and at the same time such hard work, that one has no time to think about it." "But how will you do about dining with them? To send you a bottle of Lafitte and roast turkey out there would be a little awkward." "No, I'll simply come home at the time of their noonday rest." Next morning, Konstantin Levin got up earlier than usual, but he was detained giving directions on the farm, and when he reached the mowing grass, the mowers were already at their second row. From the uplands he could get a view of the shaded cut part of the meadow below, with its grayish ridges of cut grass, and the black heaps of coats taken off by the mowers at the place from which they had started cutting. Gradually, as he rode towards the meadow, the peasants came into sight, some in coats, some in their shirts, mowing, one behind another in a long string, swinging their scythes differently. He counted 42 of them. They were mowing slowly over the uneven, low-lying parts of the meadow, where there had been an old dam. Levin recognized some of his own men. Here was Yermil, in a very long white smock, bending forward to swing a scythe. There was a young fellow, Vaska, who had been a coachman of Levin's, taking every row with a wide sweep. Here, too, was Tit, Levin's preceptor in the art of mowing, a thin little peasant. He was in front of all, and cut his wide row without bending, as though playing with the scythe. Levin got off his mare, and fastening her up by the roadside, went to meet, who took a second scythe out of a bush and gave it to him. "It's ready, sir. It's like a razor, cuts of itself," he said, taking off his cap with a smile and giving him the scythe. Levin took the scythe and began trying it. As they finished their rows, the mowers, hot and good-humored, came out into the road one after another, and, laughing a little, greeted the master. They all stared at him, but no one made any remark, till a tall old man, with a wrinkled, beardless face, wearing a short sheepskin jacket, came out into the road and accosted him. "Looky now, master. Once take hold of the rope, there's no letting go," he said, and Levin heard smothered laughter among the mowers. "I'll try not to let it go," he said, taking his stand behind Tit and waiting for the time to begin. "Mindy," repeated the old man. Tit made room, and Levin started behind him. The grass was short close to the road, and Levin, who had not done any mowing for a long while and was disconcerted by the eyes fastened upon him, cut badly for the first moments, though he swung his scythe vigorously. Behind him he heard voices. "It's not set right. Handle's too high. See how he has to stoop to it," said one. "Press more on the heel," said another. "Never mind, he'll get on all right," the old man resumed. "He's made a start. You swing it too wide, you'll tire yourself out. The master, sure, does his best for himself, but see the grass missed out? Oh, for such work us fellows would catch it." The grass became softer, and Levin, listening without answering, followed Tit, trying to do the best that he could. They moved 100 paces. They kept moving on without stopping. not showing the slightest weariness, but Levin was already beginning to be afraid he would not be able to keep up. He was so tired. He felt as he swung his scythe that he was at the bad end of his strength, and was making up his mind to ask Teet to stop. But at that very moment, he stopped of his own accord, and stooping down picked up some grass, rubbed his scythe, and began whetting it. Levin straightened himself, and drawing a deep breath, looked round. Behind him came a peasant, and he too was evidently tired, for he stopped at once without waiting to mow up to Levin, and began whetting his scythe. Teet sharpened his scythe and Levin's, and they went on. Levin followed him, trying not to get left behind, and he found it harder and harder. The moment came when he felt he had no strength left, but at that very moment Teet stopped and whetted the scythes. So they mowed the first row, and this long row seemed particularly hard work to Levin. But when the end was reached, and Teet, shouldering his scythe, began with deliberate stride returning on the tracks left by his heels in the cut grass, and Levin walked back in the same way over the space he had cut, in spite of the sweat that ran in streams over his face, and fell in drops down his nose, and drenched his back as though he had been soaked in water, he felt very happy. What delighted him particularly was that now he knew he would be able to hold out. His pleasure was only distributed by his row not being well cut. I will swing less with my arm and more with my whole body, he thought, comparing Teet's row, which looked as if it had been cut with a line, with his own unevenly and irregularly lying grass. The first row, as Levin noticed, Teet had moved specially quickly, probably wishing to put his master to the test, and the row happened to be a long one. The next rows were easier, but still Levin had to strain every nerve not to drop behind the peasants. He thought of nothing, wished for nothing, but not to be left behind the peasants and to do his work as well as possible. He heard nothing but the swish of scythes, and saw before him Teet's upright figure mowing away, the crescent-shaped curve of the cut grass, the grass and flower heads slowly and rhythmically falling before the blade of his scythe, and ahead of him the end of the row, where would come the rest. Suddenly, in the midst of his toil, without understanding what it was or whence it came, he felt a pleasant sensation of chill on his hot, moist shoulders. He glanced at the sky in the interval for whetting the scythes. A heavy, lowering storm cloud had blown up, and big raindrops were falling. Some of the peasants went to their coats and put them on. Others, just like Levin himself, merely shrugged their shoulders, enjoying the pleasant coolness of it. Another row, and yet another row, followed, long rows and short rows, with good grass and with poor grass. Levin lost all sense of time, and could not have told whether it was late or early now. A change began to come over his work, which gave him immense satisfaction. In the midst of his toil there were moments during which he forgot what he was doing, and it came all easy to him, and at those same moments his row was almost as smooth and well cut as Teet's. But so soon as he recollected what he was doing and began trying to do better, he was at once conscious of all the difficulty of his task, and the row was badly mown. On finishing yet another row he would have gone back to the top of the meadow again to begin the next, but Teet stopped, and going up to the old man said something in a low voice to him. They looked at the sun. What are they talking about? And why doesn't he go back? Thought Levin, but guessing that the peasants had been mowing no less than 4 hours without stopping, and it was time for their lunch. Lunch, sir, said the old man. Is it really time? That's right, lunch then. Levin gave his scythe to Teet, and together with the peasants, who were crossing the long stretch of mown grass, slightly sprinkled with rain, to get their bread from the heap of coats, he went towards his house. Only then he suddenly awoke to the fact that he had been wrong about the weather, and the rain was drenching his hay. "The hay will be spoiled," he said. "Not a bit of it, sir. Mow in the rain, and you'll rake in fine weather," said the old man. Levin untied his horse and rode home to his coffee. Sergei Ivanovitch was only just getting up. When he had drunk his coffee, Levin rode back again to the mowing before Sergei Ivanovitch had had time to dress and come down to the dining room. End of chapter 4. All right. Levin is doing a little bit of escapism by mowing. So he had experience before with mowing and he really enjoyed it. He really enjoyed the exercise, the intense labor, but he also really enjoyed that because it was so intense and vigorous and difficult, he had no time to think of anything. It just erased his mind, and he really liked that, and that's what he's looking forward to, and he really wants to just spend all day doing this. And he tells his brother Sergei that he's going to do this, and Sergei's like, okay, but like, what are you going to do for lunch? Like, aren't the peasants going to talk about you? It's going to be difficult. You think you can do it? Like, all of these questions that are normal questions, doubting questions, yes, but normal questions to somebody who has not done this. And Levin goes the next day and starts mowing. And he realizes that it is really difficult, more difficult than he thought it was going to be. But he's trying so hard to keep up. And as he's doing it, he does hear people talking around him and being like almost like telling him direction, but also being like, ooh, that wasn't very good, like that type of thing. So he's like not answering those comments or any of the comments, but just making adjustments and fixing things. And there comes a break, and he's like, why are we stopping? And it's like, sir, it is lunchtime. And he's like, ah, yes, okay, very good. And so he's not going to eat with the workers. No, no, don't be silly. He's going to go and eat at home. And it does rain, which is not what Levin thought was going to happen that day, but he kind of welcomes it because he is so hot and just tired and sweaty. So, like, feeling the cool rain feels good. And he's like, oh, well, I was wrong. Like, the hay is getting all wet. It's going to be ruined. And the older guy who's been, like, helping him through this and guiding him along is like, no. They say to cut in the rain and rake in fair weather. Like, it'll be okay. Which is interesting as well because, like, Levin knows a lot, sure, but, like, the workers know a lot too. They know maybe more than Levin does. Yeah, he's role playing. He's role playing of being a peasant and putting on the guise of somebody who isn't him and doesn't need to have the same worries or responsibilities or fill in the blank that he does. Chapter 5. After lunch, Levin was not in the same place in the string of mowers as before, but stood between the old man who had accosted him jocosely and now invited him to be his neighbor, and a young peasant who had only been married in the autumn, and who was mowing this summer for the first time. The old man, holding himself erect, moved in front, with his feet turned out, taking long, regular strides, and with a precise and regular action which seemed to cost him no more effort than swinging one's arms in walking. As though it were in play, he laid down the high, even row of grass. It was as though it were not he, but the sharp scythe of itself swishing through the juicy grass. Behind Levin came the lad Mishka, His pretty, boyish face, with a twist of fresh grass bound round his hair, was all working with effort. But whenever anyone looked at him, he smiled. He would clearly have died sooner than own it was hard work for him. Levin kept between them. In the very heat of the day, the mowing did not seem such hard work to him. The perspiration with which he was drenched cooled him, while the sun, that burned his back, his head, and his arms, bare to the elbow, gave a vigor and dogged energy to his labor. And more often now came those moments of unconsciousness, when it was possible not to think what one was doing. The scythe cut of itself. These were happy moments. Still more delightful were the moments when they reached the stream where the rows ended, and the old man rubbed his scythe with the wet, thick grass, rinsed its blade in the fresh water of the stream, ladled out a little in a tin dipper, and offered Levin a drink. "What do you think of my home brew? Eh? Good," said he, winking. And truly, Levin had never drunk any liquor so good as this warm water with green bits floating in it, and a taste of rust from the tin dipper. And immediately after this came the delicious, slow saunter with which his hand on the scythe, during which he could wipe away the streaming sweat, take deep breaths of air, and look about at the long string of mowers, and at what was happening around in the forest and the country. The longer Levin mowed, the oftener he felt the moments of unconsciousness in which it seemed not his hands that swung the scythe, but the scythe mowing of itself, a body full of life and consciousness of its own, and as though by magic, without thinking of it, the work turned out regular and well finished of itself. These were the most blissful moments. It was only hard work when he had to break off the motion which had become unconscious, and to think when he had to mow round a hillock or a tuft of sorrel. The old man did this easily. When a hillock came, he changed his action, and at one time with the heel, and at another with the tip of his scythe, clipped the hillock round both sides with short strokes. And while he did this, he kept looking about and watching what came into view. At one moment he picked a wild berry and ate it, or offered it to Levin. Then he flung away a twig with the blade of the scythe. Then he looked at a quail's nest from which the bird flew just under the scythe, or caught a snake that crossed his path, and lifting it on the scythe as though on a fork, showed it to Levin, and threw it away. For both Levin and the young peasant behind him, such changes of position were difficult. Both of them, repeating over and over again the same strained movement, were in a perfect frenzy of toil, and were incapable of shifting their position, and at the same time watching what was before them. Levin did not notice how time was passing. If he had been asked how long he had been working, he would have said half an hour. And it was getting on for dinner time. As they were walking back over the cut grass, the old man called Levin's attention to the little girls and boys who were coming from different directions. Hardly visible through the long grass, and along the road towards the mowers, carrying sacks of bread, dragging at their little hands and pitchers of the sour rye beer, with cloths wrapped round them. "Look'ee, the little emit's crawling," he said, pointing to them, and he shaded his eyes with his hand to look at the sun. They mowed 2 more rows. The old man stopped. "Come, master, dinner time," he said briskly, and on reaching the stream of the mowers moved off across the lines of cut grass towards their pile of coats, where the children who had brought their dinners were sitting waiting for them. The peasants gathered into groups, those further away under a cart, those nearer under a willow bush. Levin sat down by them. He felt disinclined to go away. All constraint with the master had disappeared long ago. The peasants got ready for dinner. Some washed. The young lads bathed in the stream. Others made a place comfortable for the rest, untied their sacks of bread, and uncovered the pitchers of rye beer. The old man crumpled up some bread in a cup, stirred it with the handle of a spoon, poured water on it from the dipper, broke up some more bread, and having seasoned it with salt, he turned to the east to say his prayer. "Come, master, taste my sop," said he, kneeling down before the cup. The sop was so good that Levin gave up the idea of going home. He dined with the old man, and talked to him about his family affairs, taking the keenest interest in them, and told him about his own affairs and all the circumstances that could be of interest to the old man. He felt much nearer to him than to his brother, and could not help smiling at the affection he felt for this man. When the old man got up again, said his prayer, and lay down under a bush, putting some grass under his head for a pillow, Levin did the same, and in spite of clinging flies that were so persistent in the sunshine, and the midges that tickled his hot face and body, he fell asleep at once, and only waked when the sun had passed to the other side of the bush and reached him. The old man had been awake a long while, and was sitting up whetting the scythes of the younger lads. Levin looked about him and hardly recognized the place. Everything was so changed. The immense stretch of meadow had been mown and was sparkling with the peculiar fresh brilliance, with its lines of already sweet-smelling grass in the slanting rays of the evening sun, and the bushes about the river had been cut down, and the river itself, not visible before, now gleaming like steel in its bends, and the moving, ascending peasants, and the sharp wall of grass of the unmown part of the meadow, and the hawks hovering over the stripped meadow. All was perfectly new. Raising himself, Levin began considering how much had been cut, and how much more could still be done that day. The work done was exceptionally much for 42 men. They had cut the whole of the big meadow, which had, in the years of serf labor, taken 30 scythes 2 days to mow. Only the corners remained to do, where the rows were short. But Levin felt a longing to get as much mowing done that day as possible, and was vexed with the sun sinking so quickly in the sky. He felt no weariness. All he wanted was to get his work done more and more quickly, and as much done as possible. "Could you cut Mashkin upland too? What do you think?" he said to the old man. "As God wills. The sun's not high. A little vodka for the lads." At the afternoon rest, when they were sitting down again, and those who smoked had lighted their pipes, the old man told the men that Mashkin uplands to be cut. There'll be some vodka. "Why not cut it?" "Come on, Pete, we'll look sharp. We can eat at night. Come on," cried the voices, and eating up their bread, the mowers went back to work. "Come, lads, keep it up," said Teet, and ran on ahead almost at a trot. Get along," said the old man, hurrying after him and easily overtaking him. "I'll mow you down. Look out." And young and old mowed away, as though they were racing with one another. But however fast they worked, they did not spoil the grass, and the rows were laid just as neatly and exactly. The little piece left uncut in the corner was mown in 5 minutes. The last of the mowers were just ending their rows while the foremost snatched up their coats onto their shoulders and crossed the road towards Mashkin upland. The sun was already sinking into the trees when they went with their jingling dippers into the wooded ravine of Mashkin upland. The grass was up to their waists in the middle of the hollow, soft, tender, and feathery, spotted here and there among the trees with wild heart's ease. After a brief consultation, whether to take the rows lengthwise or diagonally, Prohor Yermolin, also a renowned mower, a huge, black-haired peasant, went on ahead. He went up to the top, turned back again, and started mowing, and they all proceeded to form in line behind him, going downhill through the hollow and uphill right up to the edge of the forest. The sun sank behind the forest. The dew was falling by now, and mowers were in the sun only on the hillside, but below, where a mist was rising, and on the opposite side, they mowed into the fresh, dewy shade. The work went rapidly. The grass cut with a juicy sound, and was at once laid in high, fragrant rows. The mowers, from all sides, brought closer together in the short row, kept urging one another on to the sound of jingling dippers and clanging scythes, and the hiss of the whetstones sharpening them, and good-humored shouts. Levin still kept between the young peasant and the old man. The old man, who had put on his short sheepskin jacket, was just as good-humored, jocose, and free in his movements. Among the trees they were continually cutting with their scythes the so-called birch mushrooms, swollen fat in the succulent grass. But the old man bent every time he came across a mushroom, picked it up, and put it in his bosom. "Another present for my old woman," he said as he did so. Easy as it was to mow the wet, soft grass, it was hard work going up and down the steep sides of the ravine. But this did not trouble the old man. Swinging his scythe just as ever, and moving his feet in their big, plated shoes with firm little steps, he climbed slowly up the steep place, and though his breeches hanging out below his smock, and his whole frame trembled with effort, he did not miss one blade of grass or one mushroom on his way, and kept making jokes with the peasants and Levin. Levin walked after him, and often thought he must fall as he climbed with a scythe up a steep cliff where it would have been hard work to clamber without anything. But he climbed up and did what he had to do. He felt as though some external force were moving him. End of chapter 5. All right, so it's after the noon nap, and Levin has come back out, and he's getting the hang of it. There are less whispers and weirdness between him and the peasants, and he just wants to work. And they take another pause to have supper, one of those, dinner, I think. And Levin decides not to go back to the house, and his guide has made a sop. And he's like, "Here, try this." And he tries it, and he's like, "All right, well, this is kind of good." So he stays there, and he starts talking with them, and they, are talking about the woes and everything like that, and there's just a little bit left to mow. And Levin is like, "We need to mow this." And so they do. Part 3, Chapter 6. Mashkin Upland was mown. The last row finished. The peasants had put on their coats and were happily trudging home. Levin got on his horse and, parting regretfully from the peasants, rode homewards. On the hillside he looked back. He could not see them in the mist that had risen from the valley. He could only hear rough, good-humored voices, laughter, and the sound of clanking scythes. Sergei Ivanovitch had long ago finished dinner, and was drinking iced lemon and water in his own room, looking through the reviews and papers which he had only just received by post, when Levin rushed into the room, talking merrily, with his wet and matted hair sticking to his forehead, and his back and chest grimed and moist. "We mowed the whole meadow. Oh, it is nice, delicious. And how have you been getting on?" said Levin, completely forgetting the disagreeable conversation of the previous day. "Mercy, what do you look like?" said Sergei Ivanovitch. for the first moment looking round with some dissatisfaction. "And the door, do shut the door," he cried. "You must have let in a dozen, at least." Sergei Ivanovitch could not endure flies, and in his own room he never opened the window except at night, and carefully kept the door shut. "Not one, on my honor, but if I have, I'll catch them. You wouldn't believe what a pleasure it is. How have you spent the day?" "Very well. But have you really been mowing the whole day? I expect you're as hungry as a wolf. Kuzma has got everything ready for you." "No, I don't feel hungry even. I had something to eat there, but I'll go and wash." "Yes, go along, and I'll come to you directly," said Sergei Ivanovitch, shaking his head as he looked at his brother. "Go along, make haste," he added, smiling, and gathering up his books, he prepared to go too. He, too, felt suddenly good-humored and disinclined to leave his brother's side. "But what did you do while it was raining?" "Rain? Why, there was scarcely a drop. I'll come directly. So you had a nice day, too? That's first-rate." And Levin went off to change his clothes. 5 minutes later the brothers met in the dining-room, although it seemed to Levin that he was not hungry, and he sat down to dinner simply as not to hurt Kuzma's feelings. Yet when he began to eat, the dinner struck him as extraordinarily good. Sergei Ivanovitch watched him with a smile. "Oh, by the way, there's a letter for you," he said. "Kuzma, bring it down, please. And mind you shut the doors." The letter was from Oblonsky. Levin read it aloud. Oblonsky wrote to him from Petersburg. "I have had a letter from Dolly. She's at Ergushovo, and everything seems going wrong there. Do write over and see her, please. Help her with advice. You know all about it. She will be so glad to see you. She's quite alone, poor thing. My mother-in-law and all of them are still abroad." "That's capital. I will certainly ride over to her," said Levin. "Or we'll go together. She's such a splendid woman, isn't she?" "They're not far from here, then?" 25 miles, or perhaps it is 30, but a capital road. Capital. We'll drive over." "I shall be delighted," said Sergei Ivanovitch, still smiling. The sight of his younger brother's appearance had immediately put him in good humor. "Well, you have an appetite," he said, looking at his dark red, sunburnt face and neck bent over the plate. "Splendid! You can't imagine what an effectual remedy it is for every sort of foolishness. I want to enrich medicine with a new word. Arbeitsker. Well, but you don't need it, I should fancy." "No, but all sorts of nervous invalids." "Yes, it ought to be tried. I had meant to come to the mowing to look at you, but it was so unbearably hot that I got no further than the forest. I sat there a little, and went on by the forest to the village, met your old nurse, and sounded her as to the peasants' view of you. As far as I can make out, they don't approve of this. She said, 'It's not a gentleman's work.' Altogether, I fancy that in the people's ideas there are very clear and definite notions of certain, as they call it, gentlemanly lines of action, and they don't sanction the gentry's moving outside bounds clearly laid down in their ideas." "Maybe so, but anyways, it's a pleasure such as I have never known in my life. And there's no harm in it, you know, is there?" answered Levin. "I can't help it if they don't like it, though I do believe it's all right, eh?" "Altogether," pursued Sergei Ivanovitch, "you're satisfied with your day?" "Quite satisfied. We cut the whole meadow, and such a splendid old man I made friends with there. You can't fancy how delightful he was." "Well, so you were content with your day?" "And so am I. First, I solved 2 chess problems, and one a very pretty one, a pawn opening. I'll show it to you. And then I thought over our conversation yesterday." "Ugh, our conversation yesterday," said Levin, blissfully dropping his eyelids and drawing deep breaths after finishing his dinner, and absolutely incapable of recalling what their conversation yesterday was about. "I think you are partly right. Our difference of opinion amounts to this, that you make the mainspring self-interest, while I suppose that interest in the common weal is bound to exist in every man of a certain degree of advancement. Possibly you are right, too, that action founded on material interest would be more desirable. You are altogether, as the French say, too prématuré. Energetic action, or nothing. Levin listened to his brother and did not understand a single word, and did not want to understand. He was only afraid his brother might ask him some question which would make it evident he had not heard. So, that's what I think it is, my dear boy, said Sergei Ivanovitch, touching him on the shoulder. Yes, of course. But do you know? I won't stand up for my view, answered Levin with a guilty, childlike smile. Whatever was it I was disputing about? He wondered. Of course, I'm right, and he's right, and it's all first rate. Only I must go round to the counting-house and see to things. He got up, stretching and smiling. Sergei Ivanovitch smiled, too. If I want to go out, let's go together, he said, disinclined to be parted from his brother, who seemed positively breathing out freshness and energy. Come, we'll go to the counting-house, if you have to go there. Oh, heavens! Shouted Levin so loudly that Sergei Ivanovitch was quite frightened. What? What's the matter? How's Agafea Mikhailovna's hand? said Levin, slapping himself on the head. I'd positively forgotten her, even. It's much better. Well, anyway, I'll run down to her. Before you've time to get your hat on, I'll be back. And he ran downstairs, clattering with his heels like a spring rattle. End of chapter 6. All right, chapter 6 is seemingly like a segue chapter. Levin is on this high of mowing all the livelong day and having like a good relationship now with one of the workers, and just having a great day. And he's like not really listening, and he's like doesn't even realize he's hungry. That happens to me sometimes too, and it's like, oh, I'm not really hungry. And then you have that first bite and you're like, oh baby, I was hungry. And he he's getting ready, whatever. He comes back home and Sergei is just like almost like not quite, but like almost overwhelmed by the excitement of Levin, and they meet for supper and they go downstairs and Levin is like, "Oh yeah, my day or how was your day?" And Sergei's like, "Yeah, my day was great. I did two things. One, I figured out a chess problem, and let me tell you, it's amazing. It's with a pawn opening. I'll show it to you later. And two, I thought more about our conversation yesterday." And Levin, in his head, is like, "I don't know what he's talking about. I don't even remember what we conversated about," which we know was a very heated discussion, a one-sided heated discussion. And Levin is listening to him, but not really listening to him, as Sergei is like, well, like, I guess you did have some points, and like, I had points, and blah, blah, blah. And they're gonna go out together. And Levin is like, oh, I totally forgot about Agafea. Like, how is she doing? I'm gonna go see how she is. And that's pretty much it. Chapter 7. Stepan Arkadyevitch had gone to Petersburg to perform the most natural and essential official duty, so familiar to everyone in the government service, though incomprehensible to outsiders. That duty, but for which one could hardly be in government service, of reminding the ministry of his existence, and having, for the due performance of this right, taken all the available cash from home, was gaily and agreeably spending his days at the races and in the summer villas. Meanwhile, Dolly and the children had moved into the country, to cut down expenses as much as possible. She had gone to Ergushovo, the estate that had been her dowry, and the one where in spring the forest had been sold. It was nearly 40 miles from Levin's, Pokrovsko. The big old house at Ergushovo had been pulled down long ago, and the old prince had had the lodge done up and built onto. 20 years before, when Dolly was a child, the lodge had been roomy and comfortable, though, like all lodges, it stood sideways to the entrance avenue and faced the south. But by now this lodge was old and dilapidated. When Stepan Arkadyevitch had gone down in the spring to sell the forest, Dolly had begged him to look over the house and order what repairs might be needed. Stepan Arkadyevitch, like all unfaithful husbands indeed, was very solicitous for his wife's comfort, and he had himself looked over the house and given instructions about everything that he considered necessary. What he considered necessary was to cover all the furniture with cretonne, to put up curtains, to weed the garden, to make a little bridge on the pond, and to plant flowers. But he forgot many other essential matters, the want of which greatly distressed Darya Alexandrovna later on. In spite of Stepan Arkadyevitch's efforts to be an attentive father and husband, he never could keep in his mind that he had a wife and children. He had bachelor tastes, and it was in accordance with them that he shaped his life. On his return to Moscow, he informed his wife with pride that everything was ready, that the house would be a little paradise, and that he advised her most certainly to go. His wife's staying away in the country was very agreeable to Stepan Arkadyevitch from every point of view. It did the children good, it decreased expenses, and it left him more at liberty. Darya Alexandrovna regarded staying in the country for the summer as essential for the children, especially for the little girl, who had not succeeded in regaining her strength at the Scarlatina, and also as a means of escaping the petty humiliations, the little bills owing to the wood merchant, the fishmonger, the shoemaker, which made her miserable. Besides this, she was pleased to go away to the country because she was dreaming of getting her sister Kitty to stay with her there. Kitty was to be back from abroad in the middle of the summer, and bathing had been prescribed for her. Kitty wrote that no prospect was so alluring as to spend the summer with Dolly at Ergushovo, full of childish associations for both of them. The first days of her existence in the country were very hard for Dolly. She used to stay in the country as a child, and the impression she had retained of it was that the country was a refuge from all the unpleasantness of the town, that life there, though not luxurious, Dolly could easily make up her mind to that, was cheap and comfortable, that there was plenty of everything, everything was cheap, everything could be got, and children were happy. But now, coming to the country as the head of a family, she perceived that it was all utterly unlike what she had fancied. The day after their arrival, there was a heavy fall of rain, and in the night the water came through in the corridor and in the nursery, so that the beds had to be carried into the drawing-room. There was no kitchen-maid to be found. Of the 9 cows, it appeared from the words of the cowherd woman that some were about to calve, others had just calved, others were old, and others again hard-uddered. There was not butter nor milk enough even for the children. There were no eggs. They could get no fowls, old, purplish, stringy fowls were all they had for roasting and boiling. Impossible to get women to scrub the floors. All were potato hoeing. Driving was out of the question, because one of the horses was restive and bolted in the shafts. There was no place where they could bathe. The whole of the riverbank was trampled by the cattle and open to the road. Even walks were impossible, for the cattle strayed into the garden through a gap in the hedge, and there was one terrible bull who bellowed, and therefore might be expected to gore somebody. There were no proper cupboards for their clothes. What cupboards there were either would not close at all, or burst open whenever anybody passed by them. There were no pots and pans, there was no copper in the wash-house, nor even an ironing board in the maid's room. Finding instead of peace and rest all these, from her point of view, fearful calamities, Darya Alexandrovna was at first in despair. She exerted herself to the utmost, felt the hopelessness of the position, and was every instant suppressing the tears that started into her eyes. The bailiff, a retired quartermaster whom Stepan Arkadyevitch had taken a fancy to, had appointed bailiff on account of his handsome and respectful appearance as a hall porter, showed no sympathy for Darya Alexandrovna's woes. He said respectfully, "Nothing can be done. The peasants are such a wretched lot," and did nothing to help her. The position seemed hopeless. But in the Oblonsky's household, as in all families indeed, there was one inconspicuous but most valuable and useful person, Marya Filimonovna. She soothed her mistress, assured her that everything would "come round." It was her expression, Matvey had borrowed it from her, and without fuss or hurry proceeded to set to work herself. She had immediately made friends with the bailiff's wife, and on the very first day she drank tea with her and the bailiff under the acacias, and reviewed all the circumstances of the position. Very soon Marya Filimonovna had established her club, so to say, under the acacias, and there it was, in this club, consisting of the bailiff's wife, the village elder, and the counting-house clerk, that the difficulties of existence were gradually smoothed over, and in a week's time everything actually had come round. The roof was mended, a kitchen-maid was found, a crony of the village elder's, hens were bought, the cows began giving milk, the garden hedge was stopped up with stakes, the carpenter made a mangle, hooks were put in the cupboards, and they ceased to burst open spontaneously, and an ironing board covered with army cloth was placed across from the arm of a chair to the chest of drawers, and there was a smell of flat irons in the maid's room. "Just see, now, and you were quite in despair," said Marya Filimonovna, pointing to the ironing board. They even rigged up a bathing shed of straw hurdles. Lily began to bathe, and Darya Alexandrovna began to realize, if only in part, her expectations, if not of a peaceful, at least of a comfortable, life in the country. Peaceful with 6 children Darya Alexandrovna could not be. One would fall ill, another might easily become so, a third would be without something necessary, a fourth would show symptoms of a bad disposition, and so on. Rare indeed were the brief periods of peace, but these cares and anxieties were for Darya Alexandrovna the sole happiness possible. Had it not been for them, she would have been left alone to brood over her husband, who did not love her. And besides, hard though it was for the mother to bear the dread of illness, the illnesses themselves, and the grief of seeing signs of evil propensities in their children, the children themselves were now repaying her in small joys for her sufferings. These joys were so small that they passed unnoticed, like gold in sand, and at bad moments she could see nothing but the pain, nothing but sand. But there were good moments, too, when she saw nothing but the joy, nothing but gold. Now in the solitude of the country, she began to be more and more frequently aware of those joys. Often, looking at them, she would make every possible effort to persuade herself that she was mistaken, that she, as a mother, was partial to her children. All the same, she could not help saying to herself that she had charming children, all 6 of them in different ways, but a set of children such as is not often to be met with, and she was happy in them and proud of them. End of chapter 7. Okay, chapter 7. So we learned from the last chapter that Oblonsky's wife, Oblonsky, who is also Stepan Arkadyevich's wife, Dolly, who is also Daria Alexandrovich, is going to the countryside, which is the dowry house. She used to go there all the time when she was younger. So she's going there. Oblonsky was supposed to make sure that the house was ready, that the grounds were prepared, and he did what he could. But it's mentioned that sometimes he forgets that he has a wife and 6 children. So it being ready would have been fine if it was just him staying there, but it's not. It's his wife staying there, and it's the wife and his 6 children staying there. So things were not as ready as they should have been. And there was a lot that was in disrepair. And Dolly was very excited to come back and to, have the same relief as when she was a child and joy as when she was a child, but she gets there and everything is weird and wild and not working, and the cows even like aren't giving milk, and there's no like fowls that they can have, and there's no eggs and all of these things, and she gets there and it is just more stress. More stress. And even the thought of like Kitty coming to stay with her for a while is not enough to just have her help. But her serving maid sees to fixing everything. She like rolls up her sleeve, metaphorically, and makes friends with people in high places, the bailiff's wife, these types of things. And things are being mended. Fences are being mended. Cows are able to produce milk now. There's chickens that are able to give eggs. All of these things. The drawers have been fixed. Blah, 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 blah. And now she can start seeing the things. And sometimes she only sees the bad things, and she only sees all of the burden that she has, and doesn't even notice the small little nuggets of things that her children are trying to do to make things better. But other times, she only sees the good, and she only sees the joy, and she just sees all of the gold in her life. But that wasn't one of those times. And that's where we ended, where things are coming together. Chapter 8. Towards the end of May, when everything had been more or less satisfactorily arranged, she received her husband's answer to her complaints of the disorganized state of things in the country. He wrote begging her forgiveness for not having thought of everything before, and promised to come down at the first chance. This chance did not present itself. Until the beginning of June, Daria Alexandrovna stayed alone in the country. On the Sunday in St. Peter's week, Daria Alexandrovna drove to Mass for all her children to take the sacrament. Daria Alexandrovna, in her intimate philosophical talks with her sister, her mother, and her friends, very often astonished them by the freedom of her views in regard to religion. She had a strange religion of transmigration of souls all her own, in which she had firm faith, troubling herself little about the dogmas of the Church. But in her family she was strict in carrying out all that was required by the Church, and not merely in order to set an example, but with all her heart in it. The fact that the children had not been at the sacrament for nearly a year worried her extremely, and with the full approval and sympathy of Marya Filimonovna, she decided that this should take place in the summer. For several days before, Daria Alexandrovna was busily deliberating on how to dress all the children. Frocks were made or altered and washed, seams and flounces were let out, buttons were sewn on, and ribbons got ready. One dress, Tanya's, which the English governess had undertaken, cost Darya Alexandrovna much loss of temper. The English governess, in altering it, had made the seams in the wrong place, had taken up the sleeves too much, and altogether spoilt the dress. It was so narrow on Tanya's shoulders that it was quite painful to look at her. But Marya Filimonovna had the happy thought of putting in gussets and adding a little shoulder cape. The dress was set right, but there was nearly a quarrel with the English governess. On the morning, however, all was happily arranged, and towards 10 o'clock, the time at which they had asked the priest to wait for them for the mass, the children in their new dresses, with beaming faces, stood on the step before the carriage, waiting for their mother. To the carriage, instead of the restive raven, they had harnessed, thanks to the representation of Marya Filimonovna, the bailiff's horse, Brownie, and Darya Alexandrovna, delayed by anxiety over her own attire, came out and got in, dressed in a white muslin gown. Darya Alexandrovna had done her hair and dressed with care and excitement. In the old days she had dressed for her own sake, to look pretty and be admired. Later on, as she got older, dress became more and more distasteful to her. She saw that she was losing her good looks, but now she began to feel pleasure and interest in dress again. Now she did not dress for her own sake, not for the sake of her own beauty, but simply that as the mother of those exquisite creatures she might not spoil the general effect. And looking at herself for the last time in the looking-glass, she was satisfied with herself. She looked nice. Not nice as she would have wished to look nice in old days at a ball, but nice for the object which she now had in view. In the church there was no one but the peasants, the servants, and their womenfolk. But Darya Alexandrovna saw, or fancied she saw, the sensation produced by her children and her. The children were not only beautiful to look at in their smart little dresses, but they were charming in the way they behaved. Alyosha, it is true, did not stand quite correctly, but he kept turning round, trying to look at his little jacket from behind, but all the same he was wonderfully sweet. Tanya behaved like a grown-up person and looked after the little ones, and the smallest, Lily, was betwitching in her naive astonishment at everything, and it was difficult not to smile when, after taking the sacrament, she said in English, "Please, some more?" On the way home, the children felt that something solemn had happened, and were very sedate. Everything went happily at home, too. But at lunch, Grisha began whistling, and, what was worse, was disobedient to the English governess, and was forbidden to have any tart. Darya Alexandrovna would not have let things go so far on such a day had she been present. But she had to support the English governess's authority, and she upheld her decision that Grisha should have no tart. This rather spoiled the general good humor. Grisha cried, declaring that Nikolinka had whistled too, and he was not punished, and that he wasn't crying for the tart, he didn't care, but at being unjustly treated. This was really too tragic, and Darya Alexandrovna made up her mind to persuade the English governess to forgive Grisha, and she went to speak to her. But on the way, as she passed the drawing-room, she beheld a scene, filling her heart with such pleasure that the tears came into her eyes, and she forgave the delinquent herself. The culprit was sitting at the window in the corner of the drawing-room. Beside him was standing Tanya with a plate. On the pretext of wanting to give some rolls to her dolls, she had asked the governess's permission to take her share of tart to the nursery, and had taken it instead to her brother. While still weeping over the injustice of his punishment, he was eating the tart, and kept saying through his sobs, "Eat yourself. Let's eat it together." Together. Tanya had at first been under the influence of her pity for Grisha, then of a sense of her noble action, and tears were standing in her eyes too. But she did not refuse, and ate her share. On catching sight of their mother, they were dismayed, but looking into her face, they saw they were not doing wrong. They burst out laughing, and with their mouths full of tart, they began wiping their smiling lips with their hands and smearing their radiant faces all over with tears and jam. "Mercy, your new white frocks, Tanya, Grisha," said their mother, trying to save the frock, but with tears in her eyes, smiling a blissful, rapturous smile. The new frocks were taken off, and orders were given for the little girls to have their blouses put on, and the boys their old jackets, and the wagonette to be harnessed, with Brownie, to the bailiff's annoyance, again to the shafts, to drive out for mushroom picking and bathing. A roar of delighted shrieks arose in the nursery, and never ceased till they had set off for the bathing place. They gathered a whole basketful of mushrooms. Even Lily found a birch mushroom. It had always happened before that Miss Hoole found them and pointed them out to her, but this time she found a big one quite of herself, and there was a little scream of delight. "Lily has found a mushroom!" Then they reached the river, put the horses under the birch trees, and went to the bathing place. The coachman, Terenti, fastened the horses, who kept whisking away the flies, to a tree, and, treading down the grass, lay down in the shade of a birch and smoked his shag, while the never-ceasing shrieks of delight of the children floated across to him from the bathing place. Though it was hard work to look after all the children and restrain their wild pranks, though it was difficult, too, to keep in one's head and not mix up all the stockings, little breeches, and shoes for the different legs, and to undo and to do up again all the tapes and buttons, Darya Alexandrovna, who had always liked bathing herself, and believed it to be very good for the children, enjoyed nothing so much as bathing with all the children. To go over all those fat little legs, pulling on their stockings, to take in her arms and dip those little naked bodies, and hear their screams of delight and alarm, to see the breathless faces with wide open, scared and happy eyes of all her splashing cherubs, was a great pleasure to her. When half the children had been dressed, some peasant women in holiday dress, out picking herbs, came up to the bathing shed and stopped shyly. Maria Filimonovna called one of them and handed her a sheet and a shirt that had dropped into the water for her to dry them, and Darya Alexandrovna began to talk to the women. At first they laughed behind their hands and did not understand her questions, but soon they grew bolder and began to talk, winning Darya Alexandrovna's heart at once by the genuine admiration of the children that they showed. "My, what a beauty! As white as sugar," said one, admiring Tanitchka and shaking her head. "But thin. Yes, she has been ill." "And so they've been bathing you too," said another to the baby. "No, he's only 3 months old," answered Darya Alexandrovna with pride. "You don't say! And have you any children?" "I've had 4. I've 2 living, a boy and a girl. I weaned her last carnival." "How old is she?" "Why, 2 years old." "Why did you nurse her so long?" "It's our custom, for 3 fasts." And the conversation became most interesting to Darya Alexandrovna. What sort of time did she have? What was the matter with the boy? Where was her husband? Did it happen often? Darya Alexandrovna felt disinclined to leave the peasant woman. So interested to her was their conversation, so completely identical were all their interests. What pleased her most of all was that she was clearly what all the women admired more than anything was her having so many children and such fine ones. The peasant woman even made Darya Alexandrovna laugh, and offended the English governess, because she was the cause of the laughter. She did not understand. One of the younger women kept staring at the Englishwoman, who was dressing after all the rest, and when she put on her third petticoat, she could not refrain from the remark, "My, she keeps putting on, and she'll never have done," she said, and they all went off into roars. End of chapter 8. All right. In this chapter, we get little slice of life, which is wonderful. Wonderfully written. So, now that things have been taken care of at the house, Daria has decided that it is time that the children take sacrament because it has been at least a year and she's a little ashamed of that. So she gets them all dressed up. There's like a whole to do about one of the dresses for one of the children, but it's all relieved and they go off. Everything's great. They come back. They decide to go swimming and mushroom hunting. And so they go do that, and there is a very mom moment, like a proud mama moment. Like, yes, being a mom is difficult. They list the things, like what it takes to get your kid ready, let alone 6 of your kids ready, and keeping everything, you know, straight and in order. But at the same time, with all of the chaos, she's very proud of her children and just really enjoys how they are growing up and who they will become, which is wonderful. And we even had a moment when Daria was getting ready to go off to church before, way at the beginning of the book, she was talking about how she is no longer youthful and no longer pretty because she is older. Well, now she is dressing for not just herself, not to be the prettiest belle at the ball, but for her children. And like changing that mindset has changed her mood as well. And that's great. So yes, that is it for tonight. It was a pleasure. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I don't see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Bye.